And as you will have just heard, we are going to record this session as we're recording all the webinars for the journal's new series. So thank you all for joining us, and welcome to the latest in the Annals of Tourism Research journal Crossroads webinar. So we've been doing a new type of webinar associated with the journal this year, trying out a few different things. And this is one of the new webinar styles that we've been using. And this is really designed to foster conversation across the field, joining up different journals and timely topics. And so we've just got started with these in the last few months. And so we're hoping to host all of the journals in the field at some point. This is particularly timely because we are working with our companion journal, Annals of Tourism Research Empirical Insights, where we have a joint collection on impact. So our two journals, of course, are companion journals. We are closely aligned in many ways, but there are some important differences. And so particularly, you'll know that Annals of Tourism Research, that we're really looking for new theory, major methodological innovation. And this is really the primary objective of the research that we're publishing in the journal, where Annals of Tourism Research Empirical Insights is usually looking for insights that are supported by high quality empirical evidence, clear implications for impact, policy, industry, welcoming contributions that can be purely contextual, can be empirical, not necessarily aligned with those theoretical insights, and even replication studies are welcome there. So setting that up, giving you an idea of what our two journals are, how we're related, how we're companion journals, and this joint collection has really brought them together. I'm going to hand over to Ksenia to talk about that collection, because she led on that with the former editors-in-chief, Scott McCabe and Sarah Dolnikar.
Thank you, Gillian, and welcome everyone, especially on this first week of August. We know it's a difficult time to get everyone on the same page at the same time, even though it's a digital space. This collection actually originated in the idea that we publish a lot of work in Annals of Tourism Research and Empirical Insights, but also other journals, where we always include, or most of the time, we include a section on contribution, how our research is expected to contribute to practice. But we don't really track it to be available to the wider audiences. Selected universities, especially in some contexts such as UK, do in fact look into the impact research generates, but this stays internal. So we don't really communicate this to wider audiences. So that was actually the idea behind this collection. However, when we started receiving, so authors who published in either of the journals were invited to reflect on the impact the study has created. And as we started receiving submissions, the insights we received actually went beyond our original scope, because we didn't realize, I guess, to the extent to which impact is not very straightforward. So of course we know many insights and many implications that we write may never reach the audience we're targeting, especially policymakers, industry practitioners. But interestingly, that even studies and research that has been commissioned by certain actors and players are not that easy to actually translate into the impact. So while the original idea was to document the impact each piece of research could create, in the end we have published an array of commentaries that looked at how research sometimes fails to create an impact, and how a researcher himself or herself actually tried to work with the industry player for broader and more impactful solutions. So it's in my view, actually, our impact collection has become much more interesting than the original idea that we envisioned with Sarah and Scott to begin with. So today we have a pleasure of hearing from two teams of researchers, and I will present researchers who will start the webinar today. And those two teams of researchers published in the Annals of Tourism Research Empirical Insights. And the first is in line. We have Xiaohua Wang, who is a postdoctoral researcher in tourism and based at the University of Girona in Spain. And her research was published, original study was published, I think, 2 years ago on spiritual tourism and with emphasis on China. And another research team comes to us from a completely different geographical context, and specifically from Switzerland. And we have two researchers, Jean Fournier, who is a project manager in Interdisciplinary Center for Mountain Research in the University of Lausanne. And we have Emmanuel Salim, who is assistant professor of geography in the University of Toulouse and also University of Lausanne in Switzerland. So I will leave the floor to these two teams of researchers to share with us what impact the studies had, in which way it was ensured, or in which way they envision it to be different, it would actually happen after the study was published.
Thank you very much. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today, I'm very excited to share our commentary article involving pathways for spiritual tourism in protected areas, co-authored with Professor Janne Leibert from University of Girona. Before entering into the practical world, I would like to briefly introduce the concept of spiritual tourism. Like many other conceptions, spiritual tourism lacks a universal definition, and it is frequently described as a non-religious journey of self-development in which individuals leave their familiar surroundings, travel to extraordinary places, and return transformed. And you can see this in many other forms of tourism, for instance, secular pilgrimage, mindfulness, yoga retreat, or forest bathing. 6 years ago, Dr. Danny Blasco and we studied the very first article about spiritual tourism. During that time, spiritual tourism was a very kind of promising and new concept in the tourism research field. There were lots of studies about related to religion, pilgrimage, but we knew nothing about spiritual tourism in natural site, and especially in China. And our article happened to be the very first academic study to explore spiritual tourism in Chinese protected areas. Since during that time, most people didn't know the concept of spiritual tourism. We decided to interview the professionals like researchers, protected area managers, and industrial practitioners to figure out how does this Western concept apply within an Eastern context, and how it might relate to the Eastern understanding of relationship between humans and nature. So we came to the framework, the 天人合一 framework. In English, it's the unity of heaven and humankind, but here heaven refers to the nature or the universe rather than the religious heaven. And 天人合一 is actually reflected in Confucian philosophy and Taoist philosophy, and it's expressed in the traditional literature in China, paintings, feng shui, worship, customs, religions. All these formulate the And then it sounds quite philosophical and abstract, right? Then what about spiritual tourism in the real world, in practice? After 5 years, we figure now we can see that many protected area managers, they start to see the potential of spiritual tourism. In the past, they actually had no idea about what's this. But now they actually welcome practitioners to run spiritual tourism in the protected areas, because it doesn't only bring them the income, but also to foster the understanding and also the care for nature. And for tourism providers as well, in the past, they had very abstract idea about what kind of tourism product they wanted to develop. But then after introducing the spiritual tourism concept to them, all these providers, they start to position their product as spiritual tourism, and including the hiking and camping agencies, they reframe their product as spiritual encounters. But of course, there are lots of challenges. The main challenge is the lack of skilled practitioners and tour guides. And even though we actually got contact with quite a few practitioners, but for them, the surviving environment is very challenging. They can hardly make a live with only developing spiritual tourism or running this kind of business. Most of them, they have other work. And then what about the framework of the Tianrenhe framework in the real world? And when we were talking about all this, the Tianrenhe framework with the practitioners, protected area managers, and most of us, we were quite optimistic because it's distinguished from the religious tourism, which is kind of sensitive in China. And now the tour guides, they are not allowed to introduce or to explain the Buddhist philosophy in front of the tourists, but they can. But the Tianrenhe framework is grounded in Taoist and Confucian thought, which is actually promoted by the Chinese government. And also, it's more than religion. It's actually a philosophy of life, which can give compensation to the populace in the secular societies. But we also meet lots of challenges to make it replicable. And China is a country with thousands of years of history. And for the tourism developers, they find it very difficult to create a coherent culture and historic narratives. And even for historians, they still have lots of concerns about, for instance, in Wuyi Mountain, they have the doubt about who is Wu Yijun. And so with all these concerns, it makes Tianrenhe framework very difficult to be replicable in protected areas or in natural sites in China. And we need interdisciplinary research. We need historians and tourism practitioners and tourism researchers to work together. And at the end of the day, we need the tour guides to deliver the interpretation. And but so far, most tour guides are not capable to do this yet. And surprisingly, our framework is actually gains more influence or impact in the field of conservation. My co-authors, like Professor Amr Henze and Basvas Herun, they were leaders in IUCN, WCPA, and I was also the regional focal point in IUCN, WCPA for the young professionals. So we had the opportunity to introduce this framework to the global audiences to challenge the anthropocentric ontology. And at the same time, we actually start to teach our research in our programs. Like, for instance, in Wageningen University, Bas and other researchers and we were teaching the Tianrenhe framework and also the different culture and spiritual significance of nature to the master students and also bachelors. And then what about the spiritual tourism in protected areas? And in terms of the governance, we actually have lots of challenges because in China, protected areas follow the top-down policy. And for protected areas which want to develop spiritual tourism, they need to submit a 10-year plan to the central government. And actually, in this plan, tourism is just a small part. And also, they have lots of challenges because as public bureaus, they can't operate business directly. They need to hire a company to operate tourism in the protected area. and they always have the problem to find the partners which is capable of doing this. And the last but not least, still today, this is a photo I took like a few days ago in a protected area. We can still see lots of waste in the nature. And so lots of protected areas, they need to shut down to keep tourists away from the protected areas. And so in general, when we were talking with the protected area managers and practitioners, we found an interesting argument they delivered. They actually mentioned that the policy has very limited impact on in the real world, which I found very surprising because for them, they believe that spiritual tourism actually needs the practitioners to really work on it, to operate the tourism product instead. But the policy is something quite far away from them and not very useful for the practitioners to work on the field. So I think I'm running out of time, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Xiaohua, very much. I think we hold off Q&A for later, right? Is this correct?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's the plan, I think.
Okay. May I invite Jean and Emmanuel next, please?
Yes, so let me share my screen. Is it okay? You see it?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, perfect. So, hello everyone. I'm really happy today that we can share our work about adaptation of summer glacier tourism in Switzerland and the use of systems thinking for better adaptation. So it's a project we will present together with Jeanne, but it's a project we did with colleagues from the University of Lausanne, Leila Kebir, and two colleagues from the University of Applied Science, Western Switzerland, that are Emmanuel Franier and Ephraim Gerber. And so today we will divide the presentation in two parts. So I will present the first part about the application of systems thinking for summer glacier skiing in Switzerland. And then I will let the floor to Jeanne, who will present you the impact of this research. So first of all, to give you some context about the study, you have to know that climate change have a lot of impact on high mountain areas, and the main visible of them is glacier retreat, with a very huge change. Here is the Pastersee Glacier, the largest glacier in Austria, and it's changed from 2000 to 2020. And so this change have a lot of consequences for the aesthetic appeal of tourism in these glacier tourism places, but also have a lot of geomorphological impact, including destabilization of slopes, permafrost thawings, and rockfall intensity and frequency increase. And all of that have a lot of consequences for tourism stakeholders in glacier tourism areas. And among the different activities around glacier, one that is particularly vulnerable and exposed to climate change is summer glacier skiing. So the fact of doing skiing during summer on glacier places. And so climate change reducing a lot summer the area for summer glacier skiing, and a turning point was 2022 because the condition does not allow the Switzerland and almost all of the alpine summer glacier skiing area to open, and it was the first time that all this area was closed. So our questions to start the research was, okay, if tomorrow all these glacier tourism places have to close, what will be the consequence for the rest of the destination? I mean, not only for the activity on the glacier itself, but for the destination as a whole. And one of our assumptions was maybe it's a very niche activity, and maybe it's a way to see how stakeholders adapt very easily to this kind of situations. So just to give you an idea of what it looks like, here's photography from Saas-Fee and Zermatt. So they are the two remaining summer glacier skiing area in Switzerland. And climate change have a lot of consequences on the access to the skiing area, of the quality of snow for customers that are mainly race teams that are training for competition. So they need a good snow quality, and climate change also increase a lot the maintenance needed for running the area during the summer. So our objective here was to develop, to apply system thinking to better understand how the destination is vulnerable to climate change. So identify the vulnerability factor of summer glacier skiing destinations, identify the adaptations that are developed by stakeholders, and also identify the consequences of the adaptation from one stakeholder to another to see if we can identify pathway to maladaptation, for example. So to do that, we conduct the survey in the two remaining summer glacier places in Switzerland, Saas-Fee and Zermatt. And so we start identifying the stakeholders of the areas that are consistent for the study, then conducting semi-structured interviews with the stakeholder that allow us to construct a systemic model of adaptations. Then we did workshops in the two destinations with the different stakeholders we interviewed to show them the model and help validating and improving it. So quickly, here is the results of the first study. So I cannot go in detail because of time, but you can see the different vulnerability factor of summer glacier skiing in the two destinations and the adaptations that are produced. And the main result was that it's allow us to show the complex interrelationships between the various stakeholders in the area to see that the end of summer glacier skiing is not having it's having an impact on most of the stakeholders in the area. And we did not imagine that in the beginning. It also allows us to identify maladaptations. And maybe the most important point for this webinar is that when we presented the results to the stakeholder, it's allow them to be aware, it's actually highlight vulnerabilities that their own action can have on other stakeholders. And we really found out that when we presented the results. So now I will let the floor to Jeanne for the next part of the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Our commentary was on how academic research can generate impact on industry, policy, society within tourism system. And now you can change the slide. Thank you. For us, research can contribute to awareness rising in society about mountain destination challenges, but it also can inform policies and strategies and also contribute to the adaptation and diversification of tourism industry. But at the same time, like those collaboration can also make research more society relevant and better connected to real world challenges. So all of this is interconnected, but we will present different impacts of research separately for more clarity. And also, our goal is not only to show the impacts of our research on the studied mountain destination, but also to explain more broadly how research supports regional decision-making and also development. So for the impact on industry, as Emmanuel just said, our workshops and the systemic model we created that you just saw before, it helped stakeholders to better understand the challenges that summer glacier destinations are facing. And it provided a more systemic view of how different issues are connected. And for example, in Saas-Fee, the first destination, the stakeholders identified key priorities like more flexible planning, alternative operational solutions, long-term investments, and better coordination. But more specifically, in Zermatt in 2025, the responsibility for slope preparation was transferred from the cable car company that was responsible for both transportation and slope preparation to the Swiss Ski Association. So this contributed to a better sharing of responsibilities and operational risk. If we look at policy impact, the canton of Valais, which is the regional government, has a strong policy to support research and higher education. And this government funds interinstitutional projects, but also transdisciplinary projects. And our project was funded through one of these programs, and it shows in a way that the political authorities are committed to supporting research on tourism and destination challenges. These funding programs also strengthen the collaboration between researchers and policymakers. And in 2025, the government launched a four-season tourism strategy to encourage tourism diversification. We cannot say that this strategy is a direct result of our research, but we think it's part of a broader process in which many years of tourism research have helped inform public policy. And despite that, adaptation is in mountain destination is still largely reactive. For example, in 2023, a ski race in Zermatt was surrounded by a big controversy because preparation of this race involved heavy machinery working on the glacier, and it received widespread media attention and created a strong public debate. So as a result, the cantonal authorities introduced stricter regulation for glacier activities. And this shows like a growing public and political awareness of climate change and impacts of human activities. So now if we look at the impact on society, so there is a bigger and bigger public awareness about those challenges, and research contributes to this awareness through things like public outreach, media engagement, and also collaboration and partnerships with association, museum, and local stakeholders, but also through participatory science and transdisciplinary processes. And finally, in our region, by education and training, with bachelor and master's program in tourism, and also a certificate of advanced studies in tourism and sustainability, in which our case studies from summer glacier skiing was included. So to conclude, how academic research can generate impact within tourism system, we have 4 key lessons. First, that institutional conditions matter a lot. Long-term funding and collaboration between researchers and public authorities are really essential. Socio-cultural conditions also matter. It is in alpine regions, identity is closely linked to snow sports, and it is really important to change this mindset. And it is also as important as developing new technical and financial solutions. Also, working with stakeholders helps build trust, changes how problems are understood, and it supports new ideas for adaptations from our point of view. But this takes time and a lot of resources. And finally, for us, the decline of summer glacier skiing anticipates broader transformations across the Alps, and it highlights the need for long-term systemic adaptation and not just short-term responses. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And I will pass it to Julien to present your speakers.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to speakers for that. Yeah, we will hold off questions then till the end. We have a couple of presentations from papers that were published in the collection in the Annals of Tourism Research. So again, this is a joint collection from the two journals working together. So these two papers we have, or commentaries, I should say, Dr. Haiming Hong is going to be talking about crisis communication and unintended impacts on policy. And then that will be followed by Javier Font from the University of Surrey, who will be talking about how stakeholder co-creation reshaped EU tourism policy. So do you want to start off? Go first then, Jaime.
No problem. Just let me share my slides. Okay, so thank you for inviting me for this exciting webinar on research policy. My name is Haiming Han from University of Bath in the United Kingdom. So in about 10 minutes time, I will just briefly explain our own journey of generating impact for this article titled with Build Emotional Attachment During COVID-19. We submitted to the Annals in July 2020, I think it's in March 2020, and then published in July as a research note in July 2020. So what I'm going to do is very briefly introduce the idea behind our research product, then reflect our journey of generating wide impact. So the whole article called Build Emotional Attachment During COVID-19, why did we want to do this research? Why it matters? So when we started this project, that was at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, which is in early 2020. At that time, we noticed that the dominant approach of crisis communication was mainly focused on commitment to cleanliness. For example, luxury hotels like Four Seasons, in their website, or when their employees communicate with tourists, all they want to emphasize is about wearing face masks, keep social distancing, etc. The idea behind such a kind of approach is they tend to consider risks as a negative outcome to be avoided. And such kind of practice mirrors the risk perception literature in tourism, which again treat risk as risk judgment as cognitive and consequential. But when we visit the local coffee shops and the restaurants, when we talk to the employees and the managers, we found the managers and employees had exactly the same fear and the same anxiety towards COVID-19. They were also feared about being infected with COVID-19. They were concerned about business closure, job loss. So among also the team, we think, oh, how? Because we were trained in consumer psychology, we think, oh, maybe perhaps crisis communication focused on shared emotions may help tourism business to build emotional bonds with tourists, which can potentially benefit for tourism recovery after COVID-19. So before we submit our article to the Annals, we actually tried our idea with two local business. Basically, both were coffee shops. We told the managers about an idea to say, you don't need to maybe overemphasize on commitment to cleanliness. Instead, talk to tourists about your fear of COVID-19 and your anxiety about job loss, etc. And both managers, tried our approach, and results were very encouraging. They said they felt strong emotional bond with tourists, which is an encouraging sign for us for tourism recovery. So we submitted our idea in a more formal way. This is the very simple conceptual framework. Is talking about, okay, maybe at that time, at the beginning of the COVID-19, crisis communication strategy, which we classify as a more cognitive approach, which is trying to focus on the commitment to cleanliness versus shared emotional approach, which the business should talk about their fear, their anxiety towards COVID-19. And then we we anticipate that sharing emotional approach could lead to higher intention to visit after COVID-19, and this effect basically is mediated by emotional bond between tourism business and tourists, which in turn is mediated by brand humanization. This is because expressed emotion is a unique human feature. But when a business or when a brand expresses their emotions towards COVID-19, it will make tourists felt the brand is more like a human. So we tested this framework in an online experiment at that time, simply because when we collected data in the middle of the process, it became in the UK, it became the first lockdown. Therefore, we can't went to the tourism restaurants, coffee shop to test on consumers or tourists. Instead, we have to be a hypothetical online experiment. In general, results support our framework, which is very good news. And then we decided to submit to the annuals. And I think within 3 months of submission, we were very privileged to see our paper published in the annuals. So, and then after the publication, I mean, I had discussed with our co-authors to say, what should we do afterwards? Publication is just one thing. How about, because at that time, COVID was just started spreading around the world. So I had a discussion with my co-authors. We think that the most important thing is that as a researcher, is try to support as many tourism business as possible. So what we did to so-called generate impact is was working with media team across institutions to write a press release highlighting the importance of emphasizing sharing emotions when tourist business try to communicate with tourists at that time. And then this is a screenshot of our articles. I don't know whether my pronunciation is correct. It's called our metric. It's basically about attention scores. So the results were very encouraging. As of today, I think you can see maybe on the screen that our article is in the top 5% of all research output scored by Outmetric. And if you scroll down, I mean, sorry, I didn't screen that shot. So our article was ranked 13th out of 1,314 articles published in annuals and scored by Outmetric. And our research was reported by 17 media outlets, which kind of is, for us, is very good and encouraging result. But more importantly, we had, I will explain later, called unintended policy impact. Our short research note was used by an EU on its policy document about how to relaunch the tourism and transport sectors after COVID-19. And in that long policy document, our research was cited twice to explain two things. One, as you can see here, is talking about tourists fear the risk of exposure to COVID-19 through human contact when visiting a foreign destination, but more importantly, it encouraged foreign destination tourists to build an emotional bond, which can reduce tourists' perception of travel risk. In other words, the reason I want to emphasize its unintended policy impact was that when I explain our pathway, our general intent when we wrote the media press release was very simple. Our idea was just trying to support tourist business around the world. We never have a policy impact in our mind, but then to our surprise, through our research librarian, they created a database about policy impact. We found actually our research was used by the EU for its policy document. Now, I want to reflect a little bit, why did this happen and how did this happen? So if you talk about the policy impact, the general framework is policy impact can be classified in 3 different ways. One is called conceptual impact, which means policy makers use research in an indirect way. Second is called instrumental use, and this is the dominant approach used by the British REF to judge policy impact, which is instrumental use is talking about research actually directly cause policy change in certain countries or in certain regions, etc. And then the last one called symbolic use is basically policymakers use research to justify their pre-existing policy decisions. If we base on this classification, our reflection is, yes, we probably had some policy impact, but our impact was more conceptual rather than instrumental. In other words, our research, to see how it was used by EU, is mainly talking about tourists' perception of risk. It didn't change their it didn't help them to formulate their, for example, policy afterwards. So it's more indirect way of using it. And then the second reflection, which I found it's even puzzling when we just we had discussion among the team, was the press release was the only pathway we used to generate impact, try to generate impact. I mean, the impact was towards business around the world, but it was our media engagement a key factor leading to our policy impact. These 2 authors, Thomas and Omerat, if my pronunciation is correct, is their research published in Annals is to say media attention had a little effect. My personal experience echoed their conclusion. In 2014, I mean, for me, my original research was about advertising to children. So in 2014, I tried to lobby the British government to tighten the regulation in the digital environment about junk food advertising to children, because I think it's unfair, but the children can be unfairly biased or influenced by those junk food advertising, because they would like to request more junk food afterwards if they saw junk food advertising. So in order to lobby the government, the British government, I wrote 2 policy documents. I went to the BBC to discuss with, or actually debate with the advertising industry people. I went to the policy forum to directly engage with the British politicians at that time. I mean, 2014, 2015, did it had an impact? I think the honest answer is only after the COVID, the British government decided to call for evidence to see whether there's a need to tighten the regulation of digital advertising targeted at children. So therefore, my personal reflection is media engagement probably was not a key factor leading to our policy impact. Then, I mean, an interesting question arises. If media engagement is not the important thing, what leads to our policy impact, if there's any? So Wickett and colleagues in their 2021 articles published in Journal of Management Studies, they argue that policymakers consider both political interest and the value preferences when deciding the usage of scientific evidence. I think this actually can match, or more accurately reflect our own experience. In other words, the reason we speculate, the reason our research is used by EU policymaker is because our research at that time can serve EU policymakers' political interests that requires urgent solutions. In other words, the EU policymaker needs to think about, well, COVID-19 is here. What should we do? And they try to collect the research evidence to think about, okay, we need to gather the evidence and identify the best way to mitigate the negative impact of COVID-19. And because our research was published early in early 2020, when the pandemic just started spreading around the world, therefore it served policymakers' political interests. So that's our reflection. And then that's actually pretty much what I want to share today. Any questions, and feel free to ask afterwards.
Thank you, Haiming. And finally, we have Javier Font. I'll hand over to you. You said you don't have slides, so.
Thanks, Gillian. Yeah, no slides, guys. And I'll try to keep it brief as well, so we can then just discuss and we'll have time for questions and answers. So the beginning of my study is a bit different to some of the ones we've had before. We were contracted from the very beginning by the European Commission, and essentially, even though we publish in Annals of Tourism Research, our work was consultancy work, pure and simple. And it was a very low budget piece of work. I've been working for the European Commission for the last 20 years, on and off whenever I've been needed. And we got to a COVID period, similar as the context as the previous case study. And they basically said, every year we do an annual tourism convention. It's always in person. It's always a very kind of procedural thing as to how many people will be invited to European Parliament. It's quite bureaucratic, right, very top down. And they said, this year we got COVID. Oh dear, what do we do now? And so they outsourced the work of organizing the European Tourism Convention to me. I think they just want it off their hands, frankly. And so what we did is we created an entirely different system of feeding into the process, where we did something that was much more democratic and transparent. So rather than being invited to the convention based on who you are, we created a system where you could only be invited based on your contribution to the agenda, what the European Commission was trying to do. So at the time we were co-writing, and I was helping the European Commission writing the European Tourism Agenda for 2030. COVID was helpful in a way because it meant that people weren't just saying, well, we're going to do the same as last year plus 5% increase. For once in our lifetime, we had to rethink, are we trying to do the right thing or not? And not only the European Commission, but other people were prepared to do that. So the whole process we created was something early on in COVID where we had like 9 different parallel workshops going on over the same 3 hours, where we had people kind of voting for policies, where we had already prior input on policies, and where about 100 or 100 plus experts across Europe were participating in this policy making process. But there was a genuine need and enthusiasm around, well, we need to do things differently. The report that came out from this was used by the European Commission not only to produce something that was for that particular tourism convention, but also to inform the next stage, which was called the Tourism Transition Pathway. So the European Commission, for every sector in the economy, has been creating transition pathways, which is a methodology that then basically said, look, how do we go from where we are today to where we want our society, our economy, our environment to be in 2030? And so we use a process of backcasting. We all know what forecasting looks like. Backcasting essentially says, if by 2030 we need to be here, how do I work backwards and create the change we want to create? So the first piece of work that we did for the Commission is the article that was published in Annals in 2022, where we basically said, how do we use this participatory process? It's much more co-creative, much more user-friendly. And we're reporting that piece of work at the time. And then just last year, then we co-authored an evaluation of what that piece has meant for the European Commission. And what I chose to do is when I did this research note for Annals, which Scott said, go on, you need to do this. And then Gillian inherited that piece later on. And so what we did here is I basically said to the European Commission, I want you to co-author the piece. Because me telling the world what the impact was is not the same as a member of staff from the European Commission owning that by saying, I'm putting my name onto this. Right? And for me, that was important. It's also important because I don't know how familiar you guys are with the UK system, but we've got something called the Research Excellence Framework, the REF. And every 7 or 8 years, I can see Gillian smiling, every 7 or 8 years we have the honor, the pleasure, the pain, whatever you want to call it, of telling the world how our research has created change. And I thought, if my impact case study is going to be around the work I've done with the European Commission, I want the members of staff from the Commission themselves to co-author some of these pieces with me, to tell the world it's not only me making these claims, but then also owning the process. I'm also very aware that every time I do a piece of work with a client, and I do a lot of consultancy, but then I try to reflect in academic pieces of work. But every time I do work with them, more work comes my way because I'm remembered as the last consultant that was trusted. And then they'll, it's like kind of last name they've seen. So they'll say, Xavier, by the way, we have this other problem. Could you help us with that? And my attitude in life has always been, first I say yes, and then I figure out how I'm going to do it. That may not be what rigorous academic researchers do, but I'm quite happy to admit I'm not that. I'm an opportunist, right? I just jump in at the deep end and I figure out whether I know how to swim. Right, that's got me into a lot of trouble over the years, but also giving me opportunities that more conservative people may not have had. So for me, the piece of work with the European Commission has been fantastic because I've learned yet again how the Commission works in-house. To give you an idea of where we're at now, the work I'm now doing for the REF impact case study on what's now happened on the back of that original piece of work, and then the consultancy I've done by co-designing the tourism transition pathway. The European Commission has invested 17,000 million euros to deliver the policy I helped them create. Okay, I have never envisaged in my head what 17,000 million euros looks like, but it's a lot of money, right? And the beauty of this is I've been able to see uses and misuses of some of that money. So another piece of work I'm hoping to send soon to you guys in Annals is looking at misuses of European funding that called itself sustainable tourism funding. And we've now seen that a lot of things that have been called sustainable tourism funding are not. The word sustainability has just been shoehorned, inserted in there to make it look good. But honestly, some of the things we're funding as sustainable tourism is shocking. So I am torpedoing my own work because on the one hand, I'm saying I'm really proud. I helped decide how we're going to invest 17 billion. But on the other hand, I'm also publishing saying, but actually a lot of that money was not really sustainable tourism funding. It was just something else. Like we're sticking, to be really candid, we're sticking kind of lipstick on a pig. Okay, like that may not translate very well. Gillian knows exactly what I mean. Okay, and so, but I am at a position in my career where I'm quite happy to take the risks of saying, look, when I see something that works, I'm quite happy to put it out there. But also when I see something that doesn't work, I'm very happy to call it out because I think my reputation will also depend on being able to be honest and transparent when some things don't work. Okay, so this. And I'm very keen that even though some of the articles have been published in Annals, and Annals is first and foremost looking at theory development, I'm also then trying to say, well, but theory development and methods development can be done in parallel with then advancing impact and impactful research. And we shouldn't just assume that only practical consultancy kind of work can do that. Anyway, the most fun comes with the conversation, so I'll hand back to Gillian and Ksenia, and then we can open up for questions, hopefully.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you so much for those presentations. I thought Ksenia was here.
I am here, unfortunately. Okay. I mentioned before, I don't have a camera on my computer and my phone unfortunately died because I'm currently in Holland and we have a huge heat wave in Holland, so it cannot stand the heat. So it died, it's currently in the fridge being cooled down. So you will hear me here, but you will not see me, which is fine, I think. I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience first. Please raise your hand, or if you feel more comfortable, you can also write your question in the chat. In your question, please specify if you're addressing a specific researcher or if it's a question for general to all authors. We'll give a moment to digest a little bit and to come up with some questions. And panel members as well, feel free to ask a question to a fellow researcher.
Is that okay if I go first? It's really good to see everyone, and I really enjoy listening to you all. But I have got a question, particularly for Emmanuel. I have to go. I have to go and read that paper. I haven't read the paper yet. But when I listened to the presentation, I realized you use the IPCC framework, and I'm really keen to know if you had the opportunity to measure the vulnerability of the destination or population, and if yes, how did you measure it, and what was the outcomes?
Yes, thank you for the question. So we used the IPCC framework with the idea to identify the different hazards that have an impact on summer glacier skiing, then identify the exposure element of the destinations and the vulnerability. And this is how we created the model by identifying hazards, exposure, vulnerability, and then adaptation, and then trying to identify the impacts of the adaptation on the different exposure and vulnerability factors. And for the second question, no, we did not do a survey about the population. That would have been good, I think, but yeah, it's something missing. So yeah, we didn't do that.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
Hi, I had a comment rather than a question
Please.
for, I'm sorry, I've lost the name. Heiming? Hi, Heiming. Thank you very much for your the summary and your reflection on the impact of your work. I was thinking that you talked a bit about the way you try to use media engagement to make the government think in that way. So in my mind, that's also a form of impact in the sense that you're trying to shape the issue. You are also trying to make it appear as an issue that is something the government needs to do. Sometimes with impact, we're only looking at the outcome. Has a policy changed? Has something been taken on board? And you identified, I think, very clearly how we often tend to think of impact as being mentioned in a policy document, but we don't actually get to see what changed as an effect of that. So in some respects, you can claim that your impact is multifaceted, that is actually started from defining or helping raise awareness to the issue. It's harder to pin that it was your piece of work. But I think it's helpful for us to think about impact just outside REF, and those ones who are in the UK, we are very much sort of guided by that. And the point I think somebody else also made about sustained engagement with stakeholders, I think is significant. And I suppose this is what Xavier's presentation also evidence. So maybe just something to think about, all the different types of impact and where they might be, at what stages of the policy process they might be. But thank you all for your presentations, very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you for the comment, Constantina. So I think, I mean, many of us work in the UK and higher education sector. I mean, I mean, even these days, I mean, my own institution's REF director is always try to find people to write something called a REF impact case study when they think some people directly leads to change in stakeholders' behavior, no matter whether the policymakers, etc. So to some extent, I'm influenced by this kind of thinking to say, oh, impact has to lead to behavior change. Otherwise, it's not impact. But in the commentary we wrote for the annuals, this published in these special issues on policy research impact, we call for reconceptualize research impact, because the narrow view of only behavior change counts as impact doesn't reflect how research can influence the wide society. So I fully agree with your comment to say, yes, I tried to, for example, in terms of advertising to children, I tried to lobby the government to do something. But according to our RAF director, this is not impact because nothing changed. That's according to their interpretation. But that's the reason when I presented our research, I just try to reflect what actually means its impact. Impact can be in different ways. But thank you for the comment. I think this is something all of us can collectively think about what actually means research impact beyond academia.
Mm-hmm. And it is very challenging unless you are doing a particular consultancy piece of work to actually pinpoint even where your work is being cited or you presented evidence, say, to Parliament, that it is actually your work that is influenced. It's very difficult to prove that for the majority of us. And I think it's harder when we are working in tourism-related subjects where you have so many different types of research or topics that become policy. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I actually think that might be a really nice segue to some of the things Javier was talking about. So I wondered if he might have any additional comments there.
Oh, I mean, honestly, it's impossible because there is no funder or organization that wants to attribute change to a single organization because it's difficult for them, right? So if they attribute positive change to you, they say, well, politically, we can't because we need to say it's the result of a consensus. And also, if there's a change to something like, so look for another Elsevier paper, I've just published something where we showed that the way that Expedia shows their sustainability data, like they ask consumers how happy you are with eco-friendliness. And I was able to prove that this variable is meaningless and that customers don't understand it. So all the Expedia has done is they've now taken it down from their website. You no longer get asked that question. But they've said to me informally, we'll tell you, yeah, your paper really hurt, and we used it as a reason for taking it. But publicly, we'll never say that. We say it was part of an ongoing review. We're always going to do that, blah, 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 right? And this has happened throughout my career. And so what do you do? So then when you have a process where your university or the government wants you to make claims about what change you've made, you'll never be able to make claims showing somebody that they were doing something wrong and they stopped doing it because of you. Never. At best, you may find that they were doing something well and you help them do it better, and then they give you some praise for it. But absolutely no chance they'll show the other kind of impact.
Yeah.
I also would like to share, unfortunately, this author teams could not be here today because of the time difference, but we published another commentary in our journal on, in Australia, Australian case, policies related to climate change. And this piece of work was also, the original research study was actually commissioned by the government in Australia. So when study came out and when the authors communicated that insights to the government, COVID happened. And different priorities, government had different priorities. And they found this commentary very interesting because its authors actually document how even the work that actually was contracted by the government and paid by the government failed to produce a very direct impact. It did have impact in the end, but authors had to work very hard on that. So even a direct and straight consultancy work is not that easy to demonstrate the impact for. Javier, I think we have a question for you in the chat. Can you read it?
It does look like the question goes
a little bit
beyond the research that was presented here. So Javier, if you take that question as you'd like, it's quite a big one.
Yes.
And maybe beyond what you were actually talking about today.
Oh, I mean, I'm not going to comment on the situation in the Middle East, but let me just look at this differently. I do think that I'm concerned when all of our journals are publishing articles from very few countries. And we seem to have a way of promoting the status quo and being fairly safe. We all say that we are going to promote change, and we're innovative, we're more ambitious, actually the peer review process that we have is hugely conservative. You need to please 3 people who are already established that your work is making a marginal but not a threatening contribution to thinking. So we don't really publish that many things that are hugely ambitious or controversial. And I think we could go much faster. We need to publish faster. We need to publish things that are much more, daring. And look at what's happening in medical research, for example. You don't want to have to publish 4 years too late that you had a cure for cancer. How many people have died as a result of that research being published too late? Right? So in our field, I think we need to be responsible towards publishing much more quickly and also having a much more dynamic conversation. And this may give us the explanation for some of the things that the person in the chat has said, where we can be much more dynamic and open and inclusive in our conversations.
Thank you, Xavier. We have 4 minutes left, and I probably would like to hand it back to Gillian for closing comments.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Ksenia, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm sure we could very much continue this conversation. These were excellent presentations. Really, I think it's so great to see this conversation evolving in the field from not just thinking about those theoretical contributions to there's all these stories behind the impact of taking it forward, the lessons to be learned. It was a nice one to end on there, Xavier, talking about the happy to give you the positive kudos when you make that kind of, but anything that teaches someone a lesson, that should be learned and reflected on. No one wants to admit doing things poorly and learning from that. So things that I think keep with us as lessons. And I'm really happy that we're able to start having these conversations. Thank you, of course, to Ksenia for joining us as both the co-editor-in-chief of Annals of Tourism Empirical Insights, but also one of Annals of Tourism Research associate editors. She does a lot of work across both journals. So thank you for being here and helping us bring together these presentations. Thanks to the audience for those thought-provoking questions and discussion. This collection, this impact collection, we are continuing to accept publications for, so please do keep it on your radar to read the work that is coming out. It's being published on a almost weekly basis, I think, between the 2 journals. Ksenia, do you have anything you would like to add about the collection or a final goodbye?
Thank you to everyone. One thing I would like to maybe get a small comment back to Xavier's point. We're actually going to launch another curated collection specifically focusing on underrepresented contexts. So something Xavier mentioned before, how we often hear from the same players, the same context, and we try to extrapolate these insights into the global way. So we're trying to, hopefully you'll hear from us in 2 years' time with a new webinar about how we can learn from other contexts as well. Thank you to everyone, and it was my pleasure to co-host with Gillian today.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Julian.
Bye, Chenggong. Thank you so much for organizing and all the work you've put in behind the scenes. Really do appreciate it.
Don't worry about it. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.